We are being joined by Max Boot, military historian and columnist for the Washington Post. Thank you to our translator, as always. What is your reaction to the drone attack on Moscow? What are your initial thoughts and impressions?
Well, in English, we have an expression, what goes around comes around. And so there is no way that Russia can launch an unprovoked criminal and genocidal invasion of its neighbor, in which Russia has been committing horrible war crimes, in which Russia has been targeting Ukrainian civilians. There's no way that Russia can do that and not expect that Ukraine will strike back. And we don't know who is responsible for the drone attack on Moscow, and the Ukrainian government has denied responsibility. But clearly, there are elements connected with the Ukrainian government that want the Russian people to understand what war means. This is what Ukrainians are experiencing every single day. I mean, I was just in Kiev a little more than a week ago, and every night we had air raids. And mercifully, the Ukrainian air defenses were strong enough to intercept all of the Russian drones and missiles. But if it hadn't been for the Ukrainian air defenses, a lot of Ukrainian civilians would have died. And it's laughable to hear Putin claiming that his attacks on Ukraine are tightly focused on military targets, which is not true at all. I mean, Russian forces have destroyed entire cities like Mariupol, and they are trying to create indiscriminate devastation in Kiev and other cities, and they're only being stopped by Ukrainian air defenses. So it's understandable when Ukrainians are under nightly air attack that there would be some inclination to let Russians know what Ukrainians are experiencing.
At the same time, you wonder what the purpose of it was. Why was this done, considering that large scale war in Ukraine is still ongoing? From a military perspective, what was the aim of this?
I mean, I don't think it has a large military purpose. I think it's largely symbolic and political, just to let the Russian people know that Putin has dragged them into a war that most people don't want. And, Putin calls it a special military operation. He pretends the war is not going on. And it can seem very remote from the lives of ordinary Russians, especially in cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg. And I think this is an attempt by some Ukrainians to remind Russians that, yes, this war is going on. It can also serve to distract the Russian government. It forces Putin to move more air defenses around Moscow and St. Petersburg, and that means fewer air defenses around Russian troops in Ukraine. But this is largely a sideshow. This is not central to the main military effort, which is happening in southern and eastern Ukraine.
I read an analysis of the situation in the Financial Times that suggested that this strike could distract the leaders of the Russian military. Could this be true?
Yes, absolutely. As I said, I think at the very
Мгм.
least it
Да-да-да.
forces Russia to keep more air defenses around Moscow and in St. Petersburg. And again, that's fewer air defenses protecting Russian troops in Ukraine. And I think this is of a piece with, recently there was an incursion
Мгм.
by Russian rebels into Belgorod in the city in southern Russia on the border with Ukraine. Again, I think these are all basically meant to communicate with the Russian people, but also to distract the Russian government and the Russian military while the Ukrainian armed forces prepare for their major counteroffensive.
You just mentioned the Belgorod Oblast, Max, so I wanted to ask you, considering that lots of people are talking about the West's reluctance to support a potential attack by the Ukrainian army on Russian soil, how should the West react to incidents like this? Does it not represent something outside of the realm of Western support for Kiev?
I don't think there's any chance of that happening. I think the West is more united in its support of Ukraine now than it was at the start of the war. And yes, some of these Ukrainian incursions into Russia, which are pretty small scale, they do cause some degree of nervousness in the West, but they have not prevented the West from increasing its support. President Biden just agreed uh, to allow our European partners to provide Ukraine with F-16s. We're going to provide M1 Abrams tanks. The allies have already provided Ukraine with Leopard main battle tanks with Bradley fighting vehicles, and obviously Patriot missiles, which are shooting down these Russian missiles aimed at Kiev. So I don't see any fall off in support for Ukraine for any reason. Again, as I said, I think Putin has miscalculated pretty badly in assuming that the Western support for Ukraine would splinter, or that Ukraine would be abandoned. That's not happening. Far from it.
Mhm.
Russia is the country that's isolated. Russia has almost no allies in the world, whereas Ukraine has more than 50 countries providing it with support.
What do you think about Vladimir Putin's response? He spoke literally a couple of hours ago and said the retaliation would be identical. At the same time, it is Ukraine that is being carpeted by a huge number of Russian drones. What would an identical response from Moscow look like?
Well, when I was in Kiev, I had Ukrainian officials tell me that uh, Russia has already basically attacked Ukraine with every weapon in its arsenal, aside from nuclear weapons, and they don't think that the probability of a nuclear attack is very high because it would backfire for Putin, and it's not even clear he could deliver a nuclear weapon at this point because the Ukrainian air
Mhm.
defenses are so effective. But short of that, I don't think there's much that Putin can do that he hasn't already done. I mean, he's mounting massive attacks on Kiev almost every night. Sending dozens of drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. He's really throwing everything he can at Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are not only surviving but they're thriving under this Russian assault. So, uh, I think we should certainly be wary of what Putin will do. But I can tell you that the Ukrainian people that I spoke to and met with are not afraid of Russia at this point. They feel like they've already suffered the worst that Putin can do, and they're still standing.
To clarify, Max, you said that if there was an attempt to use nuclear weapons, that it could also be prevented somehow?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Ukrainian air defenses, with the Patriots and the IRSTs and the NASAMS and others, are very, very effective. I mean, they're shooting down every missile that's being shot at Kiev. So, if I think that's a further deterrent to any kind of
Mhm.
nuclear use, because at this point, it's not even clear that a nuclear strike could reach Ukraine in the face of these very strong air defenses. But there's many other reasons why Putin is unlikely to use nuclear weapons, including the fact that China, which is his really last remaining ally, has signaled pretty clearly it does not want to see nuclear weapons use, and it's not going to change the situation on the battlefield. And so, the Ukrainians, who are the ones who are on the firing line, who are potentially the targets, they are not allowing themselves to be paralyzed by Putin's nuclear saber rattling, and I don't think that the West should be either.
Finally, I wanted to ask you about that very counteroffensive. I'm not a military expert, but one assumes if there is this activity by the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Russia, including using the drones flying over Moscow, then you could say that the counteroffensive is imminent? Do you see that connection, or is there nothing there?
I mean, I don't know about the drone attack on Moscow, but I do think that there have been more reported Ukrainian attacks on Russian supply depots in Ukraine, including some longer range strikes. I think using probably the Storm Shadow missiles that Great Britain has provided. So, I think this is uh, what what military experts and soldiers call shaping operations. That they are preparing the battlefield, laying the groundwork for Ukrainian counteroffensive. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think this is preparations for that counteroffensive.
And what do you think is the timeline here? Do you have any ideas?
Well, the Ukrainians are not sharing their timeline with me or with anybody else. I think
Я могу представить.
this is a very closely held secret, and for very good reason. I think it will come at a time and place where the Russians don't expect it.
Thank you very much. That was Max Boot, military historian, joining us live on TV Rain.
TV Rain has started broadcasting in English so that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
Russia's military is unable to stop Ukrainian forces.
The Kremlin's newest propaganda target is now the LGBT community.
TV Rain channel has been shut down in Russia many times. The last one happened at the beginning of March, when the war started.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day, for whom we are the only TV station that tells the truth about the war. Subscribe to our English channel TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube.